Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry to the origins and evolution of American government. The executive director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion, and here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and welcome to the Virtual Center for the study of the Constitution and civic responsibility on this Tuesday. Today is the 21st day of June in the year 2016. We have passed the point at which the days become longer, and today is the first day that's a little bit shorter than yesterday. And now we go downhill, if you will, into the winter with the shorter days and the longer nights and all of that. It is a pleasure to be with you on this Tuesday here at the Virtual Center. We look forward to hearing from you. I'm sure you know, if you are tuned in live, that today is Tuesday, and on Tuesdays we do begin our program one half hour later than we do on Mondays and Wednesdays. And I am a member of the local Rotary Club, and we have our meetings at noon on Tuesday, and our programs don't end until 1, so it takes me 15 to 20 minutes to get home and get set up to go on the air. So that's why we postpone our Tuesday starts by 30 minutes. Hopefully we can make up a little bit of that, because I don't think we'll necessarily find it necessary to stop for a regular break. In our 2-hour programs, as you know, we usually stop at the top of the second hour and take a 4 or 5 minute break and give people an opportunity to get something to drink or go to the restroom or whatever. And of course, I avail myself of those same opportunities naturally. And anyway, on Tuesdays we probably won't need to do that. I think we'll be able to move right on through our program. As many of you know, if you were with us yesterday, we began the discussion of the topic of education, and we'll be pursuing that for at least today and probably the better part of tomorrow as well. We do look forward to hearing from you. I received a couple of comments on yesterday's program from people who listened, and to be very honest with you, they were more positive than I anticipated. I didn't feel that we got into the subject enough to really warrant any post-program comments, but indeed I did hear a couple. So I do invite you to share your thoughts if you have thoughts or ideas or questions or concerns or observations maybe about yesterday's program and about the topic of education generally. We would love to hear from you. I know our listeners would as well. Agnes is in the studio, and if you call, you will get her on the phone, and she will immediately connect you and get you on the air. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to communicate with me directly via email, and I really can understand that. I know there are a lot of people that are hesitant to go on the air, and I can relate to that quite easily. And therefore, you might like to share your thoughts or your ideas in an email. I would love to hear from you. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. One more time, because I want to make the point that there's no punctuation in that, and it's all lowercase. waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. I had another phone ringing at the same time, and I got a little bit discombobulated there, but and then again, I do remind you of our Facebook page. I do invite you to share your thoughts and your ideas, your reactions to some of the things that are on our Facebook page. I haven't been on it the last couple of days, but one of the things that we will open today's program with is something that I believe I did put on Facebook on our Facebook page a few days ago. So again, if you are a Facebook user, you know that you just go to the homepage, which is facebook.com, and then at the top there's a search box, and if you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will be onto our Facebook page, and there are opportunities there for you to read the various postings, and they occur in order, the most recent one being at the top. And there are opportunities on Facebook itself for you to comment. You can obviously message me as well, but you can send me an email if you'd like to react to what you see there that way, or best of all, you can use our phone number and call in on perhaps tomorrow's program and share your thoughts there, so that our other listeners can derive some benefit from your thinking and your analysis, if you will. Again, welcome to our program, and I do want you to please understand that the purpose of this program is ultimately for as much your benefit as mine. I derive pleasure from it, but I suggest to you that the real purpose of the program is to engage in some of the issues in depth that I think go a long way toward better understanding our constitutional system, the nature of our republic, and the role of citizens within it. And here we're talking about education, and I think already, even though we didn't go that deeply into Jefferson's thinking yesterday, it's very evident that Jefferson believed that the very success of this republic was dependent directly on the quality of education, the nature of the education that our citizens at all levels received. And one of the things that we touched upon yesterday, and this is in the nature of review, that this kind of gets us back where we were, Jefferson very clearly believed that there were different approaches, different kinds of education for different levels or different classes, if you will, and I use the term class advisedly, purposes. And the idea was that for those people who are expected to become leaders in our society, in our political system, the kind of education that they would receive was quite a bit different from the education that was designed and promoted by Jefferson for the masses. We talked yesterday about the fact that there seems to be a rather blatant contradiction in Jefferson, because he's talking about two different systems of education. An education at the basic elementary level, if you will, for the masses of people, and a high-level education as reflected in his work in creating the University of Virginia for the well-educated, for society's leaders, and at the time, its upper class. The contradiction obviously seems to be between the two systems of education. But as we mentioned yesterday, the contradiction seems not to be a contradiction when we realize that each of the systems or approaches to education was aimed at a different target audience. In other words, if you had two different systems of education, all of them being delivered to the same population, there would be an inconsistency, there would be a contradiction. But the fact that you're delivering two different kinds of education to two different groups of people would seem to, in part at least, eliminate the idea or the impression of contradiction. And again, where the contradiction in Jefferson comes from, of course, is in Jefferson's role as political theorist. The fact that he was author of the Declaration of Independence. And in it, he articulated in the Declaration the principles related to the idea of unalienable rights and the idea of all men being created equal in the eyes of God. And we will get to that in today's program. One of the things I thought might be a little bit helpful in setting the stage for some of this was to touch on an issue or two that relate to it. In other words, why is this particular topic, subject, so significant to our republic, and most specifically to this particular program, to the idea or the mission of the Virtual Center? I thought that this was, many people are probably thinking, I thought this was a program on the Constitution, and there's nothing in the Constitution about education or different kinds of education or who gets which particular version of education or any of that stuff. The fact of the matter is Jefferson himself made it very clear right from the beginning that the success of the republic was directly contingent on the nature of the education provided to the citizens of this republic. So he himself raised the issue that education is critical to the nature of the political system that the founders left us with independence, and especially with the creation of the Constitution of the United States. Let me give you an issue or an example of why I think this is so important. This weekend, in surfing the internet, so to speak, and looking around, I found an article which disturbed me quite a bit. And my first reaction is, oh, this is terrible. And then as I thought about it, I said, even though it's terrible, it seems to be important for where I think we'll be going in programs on the Virtual Center, especially programs related to education. This is a piece that was originally published in the Washington Post. The author, Caitlin Dewey, I found it reproduced on a website called Flagler Live, and I've mentioned this before. It's based in Flagler, Florida, and the person who's the editor of this website, Flagler Live, was a friend of mine for a number of years ago, and as a result of Facebook, we have kind of reconnected, and I've made it a policy to regularly check the Flagler Live website, because the editor there, my former friend Pierre Tristram, being the editor, writes many of the featured columns and commentary for Flagler Live. And Pierre was a columnist here in southern West Virginia when I first met him. And at that time, I thought he was one of the most creative, insightful, bright young journalists that I had come across in a long time. And after losing touch with him for many years, for about 12, 15 years, and then reconnecting and reading some of the things he's writing for the Flagler Live website, I've become convinced not only that I was right, but that he has polished his skills markedly. And he's basically writing some of the most insightful, creative, perceptive commentary that I've read anywhere. I really do believe that if you get a chance and you find yourself surfing the internet, Google flaglerlive.com and look at some of the commentary, some of the articles that Pierre Tristram has written for that publication, and I think you'll agree. Anyway, this particular story was written elsewhere by Caitlin Dewey and was reprinted from the Washington Post. And it deals with a survey about Facebook. And what the study suggests is that 70% of Facebook users only read the headline of science stories before commenting. In other words, most of those people who regularly use Facebook will oftentimes forward what they read to friends, but most often don't read it themselves. I found this very disturbing. And Caitlin Dewey's article points out that in a follow-up study, as if it needed further proof, this particular headline has been validated. According to a new study by computer scientists at Columbia University and the French National Institute, 59% of links shared on social media have never actually been clicked. In other words, most people appear to retweet news without ever reading it. I really do believe that this is symptomatic of the kind of problems and the kind of issues we have. Let's go back to Jefferson for a second. If Jefferson is right, if the republic depends on what he called an educated citizenry, an informed citizenry, then this is frightening. Because what it suggests is that the majority of our people really aren't informed at all. But on the other hand, it's very important to them that they create the illusion that they are better informed than they actually are. By forwarding many of these pieces, substantive pieces, to friends on Facebook and other social media outlets, they are sending or giving the impression to those they communicate with that they're well-read, that they're well-rounded, when in fact they are anything but. And this is a quote from the study's co-author, Arnaud Legoux, in France. People are more willing to share an article than read it, he said. This is typical of modern information consumption. People form an opinion based on a summary or a summary of summaries without making the effort to go any deeper, unquote. This is very disturbing. It violates Jefferson's thinking from the time of the founding. But more important, it violates the very principles of an educated, informed citizenry. It speaks rather to an empty, superficial process of image building. People much more concerned that people believe they are well informed rather than the fact that they really are well informed. The conclusion to this article, and let me read the last paragraph because I think it says a lot. Most interesting for our purposes, the author says, is this habit of sharing without clicking. A habit that, when you think about it, explains so much of the often demoralizing cesspool that is internet culture. Among the many phenomena we've tentatively attribute, in large part, to the trend. The rise of sites like BuzzFeed and others. The internet hoax, so-called industrial complex, which seems to be growing stronger. And finally, the utter lack of intelligent online discourse around any remotely complicated, controversial topic, unquote. Let me read that last phrase again. The utter lack of intelligent online discourse around any remotely complicated, controversial topics. What we're talking about here is the difference between the potential of the internet and the reality of the internet. Yesterday, at the beginning of the program, in introducing the topic of education, I shared a particular problem that myself and a couple of my colleagues are having about promoting or selling an idea of higher education aimed not at those who qualified to go to college already, but aimed rather at those who don't. Those people that are, for lack of a better term, in our society, intellectual dropouts. It doesn't mean that they have voluntarily decided to drop out. Many of them have been forced out because of academic deficiencies or academic problems or very negative academic experiences that they've had in their formal educational background, whether it be high school or whether it be secondary or higher education. The fact of the matter is, many people have had very, very negative experiences in education. And the result is that many of them have psychologically thrown in the towel, as it were, and decided not to pursue education any further. In our society, with job competition the way it is, with the demands for skill development going up all the time, it seems to me that the nature of our economy almost demands that people become competitive, at least competitive enough to make it in this kind of a society. We can't afford all of these people, all of these human beings that our educational system is discarding. And the worst part of it is, those in education don't really think that they are discarding anybody. They think that they are pursuing and discovering talent under the guise of trying to find the most talented. They are creating a disheartened population of adults who don't see any way to turn, any direction for them. Those are the people that we are trying to target in the educational program we're talking about. But at least up to this point, we've run into the proverbial brick wall, as it were, with our colleges and universities, because their priority are qualified students. Their priority is finding qualified students. They don't see their role as qualifying anybody for admission to college. That's, they believe, what the high schools are supposed to be doing. And the fact of the matter is, and we all know this, either in our own life, in our own situations, or if we have children, we've seen it with them. How schools tend to constantly rationalize their lack of success by blaming it on the previous level of education. If the elementary schools gave us in the middle schools people who really were prepared for advanced study, then the students we educate would be much more competitive, but better able to compete. And if you go to the high schools will say the same thing about the middle schools. And the colleges and universities will say the same thing about the high schools. The fact of the matter is, what all of them are looking for are the most talented. They are the ones that get the scholarships. They are the ones that build the reputation, contribute to the reputation of the particular school or college that they're in. They're the ones that get the best jobs. They're the ones that get the scholarships and fellowships. They're the ones that get the recognition. They're the ones that bring, that build on the reputations of the institutions they've attended. Consequently, they're the ones that get all the attention. Those are the students. The 10 to 15% of the best students get 85% of the attention of counselors, of those people who sit down with them and make recommendations and try to get them into the colleges of their choice. The vast majority of students who don't fit into that upper echelon tend to be brushed aside, blown off, as it were. We have somehow, from the very beginning, looked at education as a process of discovering undiscovered talent, not educating our population. And the irony is, and we saw this yesterday, Jefferson himself is in part responsible for this. Because Jefferson himself recognized that all the talent, all the ability was not amongst the upper classes. So Jefferson saw the required 3 years of universal education at public expense as an opportunity to discover talent within the masses. And he laid out a process of finding the boy of best genius each year in each school and moving that child forward at public expense, the residue to be dismissed. Those are Jefferson's exact words. The reality is that in today's society, most of us find ourselves included in what Jefferson referred to as residue. If we didn't shine academically, if we didn't impress our teachers, then the system really didn't have time for us. And the fact of the matter is, before the internet and before technology made it possible for peoples throughout the world to access education, which up to this point in time, only the most developed nations were able to bring to their citizens. Until that time, we were at the top of the heap. We had the best education system in the world, we believed. We had the best quality higher education system in the world. Our schools, colleges, and universities were in demand throughout the world. Leaders in other nations sent their young people, their talented young people, to this country to go to college and graduate schools and professional schools, medical schools, law schools, and the rest of it. We were at the top of the heap for so long that we really, it seems to me, took it for granted. And we never really took the time to look seriously at what we were doing and how we were doing it. But with modern technology, with the so-called information revolution, suddenly our entire culture was thrust into competition with the rest of the world. Our students, all of our students, were confronted with a competitive situation that they had never experienced before. And what we found as a result of this process is just how deficient our education system has been. It works well for the brightest students, for the small minority, the 10 to 15% who sit at the top, the ones that get all the A's, the one that have the 4-point averages in college, for example. The system works well for them. But for the rest of us, it's been proven to be woefully deficient, to the point that many of our young people are beginning to question the validity of education at all. Many of them are beginning to question the value of college education, especially in light of the cost associated with it. Tuition costs have escalated at rates far ahead of the regular inflation rate throughout the rest of the economy. And increasingly, with tighter and tighter budget restrictions, states have been less inclined to support their educational establishments have been reluctant to support their educational establishments generously. It used to be that our state governments and local governments saw education, saw the preparation of the younger generation as a priority for the nation or the community's future. But increasingly, rigid budgets have resulted in the fact that less and less of our treasure goes into education. The result being that if people want an education, increasingly they've had to pay for it. And in the process, this republic's commitment to educating all of its citizens is in serious jeopardy. And the way we've rationalized it is that we've begun to raise serious questions as to whether education, higher education, even secondary education, has become so expensive, maybe it's not worth it. When you look at the people like Bill Gates and some of the success stories, people that have become fabulously successful, who left college, who didn't finish college, then people are inclined to say, why should I go into, very, very deep debt, serious debt, when there's no guarantee at the other end that there's a job or a career for me? And a lot of people are feeding this. It seems to me then that this little article about the number of people who forward substantive materials in social media, very adept, very conscious of sending the message to other people that they are well read, when in fact they don't read it themselves. Or better yet, they read the title or the subtitle or the first couple of sentences of an article, find out what it's about, and then immediately take upon themselves the chore of creating the illusion that they actually read it, when in fact they didn't. It kind of suggests the superficiality of the society we're in. It raises serious questions for our young people. There's no question. It raises serious questions for our young people who really are conflicted. They don't know what to do. They don't know whether it's worth it. In my own case, when I graduated from high school, and this was obviously a long time ago, better than 50 years ago, I can remember my own father raising the same kinds of questions with me. When I got out of high school, I went to work for 3 years in a factory, in a paper mill. I was working shift work. And it dawned on me very quickly that this isn't something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I have to say, very honestly, I did not dislike it. Some of the best friends I ever had in my life I met on this job. I respected many of the people I work with. But I also believed that there might be more for me out there than this job provided. And so I made up my mind to go back to school. I always wanted to teach school. So I made up my mind that I would go for a teaching degree. And I submitted my resignation. I gave my notice at the paper mill. My dad was absolutely astounded. Why would you give up a job that is paying you as much as you'll make even if you finish college and get a teaching degree? You're not going to make any more than you're making now. Why would you do that? I was 19, 20 years old. I didn't know why. I didn't know. I just knew I wanted to. But now we have real substantive reasons why. The cost of it. The degree of debt that many people find themselves shackled with. Isn't it unbelievable that Bernie Sanders, in his campaign, in his primary campaigns, was considered a radical, was considered a dreamer and an idealist for arguing or advocating free college tuition for our citizens. But in fact, that's really what we always had in this country. Tuitions were reasonable. The major cost of going to college was in the lost salaries that young people didn't make from working because they gave up work for 4 years to pursue a college degree. The cost was in the lost salary. It wasn't in tuition and loans and debt like it is now. It seems to me that we are in an educational crisis in our society. And the reason I believe we need to deal with this here at the Virtual Center is because I believe we can pinpoint some of the causes of the crisis that we find ourselves in right now as far back as Thomas Jefferson's philosophies of education. I really do. I think what we have in Jefferson is the idea of meritocracy. The idea that there is support for education for the very brightest, but not for everybody. In other words, subsidizing the development of the brightest students is considered to be politically acceptable, politically shrewd. But supporting the education of everybody else beyond the basics, which was Jefferson's model, is considered by many to be a waste of money. And the fact of the matter is, many of our schools, I'm thinking of our high schools, many of our schools have become social problems laboratories more than educational institutions. For generations in this country, we have looked at our schools as ways to solve our social problems. Obesity, good health, drugs, alcohol, abuse. Many of the problems that society has found itself confronted with over the years have been dumped on our schools. Let's make them take a course in this. Let's make them take a course in that. Let's make them take a course on how to be a parent, how to be a good mother, how to be a father. Let's have these female students take home dolls at night and pretend they're babies so that they will learn how to take care of a child. In other words, all of society's problems, theoretically, have their solutions in the classroom. How do you find the time to dump all of those problems in the classroom and still educate? The fact of the matter is you don't. What happens is that what we traditionally call education is pushed to the side. Talk to teachers. Ask a high school teacher or even a middle and elementary school teacher. Ask them how much time they actually spend in the school day teaching, as opposed to preparing their class for standardized tests, preparing their class so that the school will look good when the results of the latest standardized tests are published. And so increasingly, our classroom teachers are teaching to the test. They aren't educating anybody. They're grilling and grueling and training their kids to perform on a standardized test for the benefit of the school, not for the benefit of the child. That goes all the way back to the beginning, to Jefferson. The purpose of the mandatory 3 years of education was to sow the seeds of future order, was to implement or implant morality in young people, to protect society, to guarantee the stability and the security of society, not to benefit the individual child. We are now in a world where that no longer works. No longer can we focus on socializing young people rather than educating them. Now we are in a competitive world which requires that all of our people be educated to their maximum abilities. So this approach that Jefferson laid out for us, this is the way you educate the masses when most of them are never going anywhere anyway. What you do is you socialize them into being good citizens. You teach them how to behave, how to vote intelligently, what to look for in a candidate, how to recognize when they're being fed a story by a candidate. In other words, you prepare them to function for the benefit of society as a whole. The implication being that what they need to do for themselves comes naturally. In the earliest years, when Jefferson wrote, most of them were going to be farmers. In the 19th century, most of them were the children of immigrants. They were going to work in factories anyway. What they needed to learn was obedience and punctuality and responsibility and trustworthiness and good health habits. They didn't need to know anything. They didn't need to create anything. They didn't need to read Plato and Aristotle and all the rest of them. It was a waste of time. Education, such as it was, Jefferson believed, Franklin believed, needed to be useful. It needed to be practical. So what you begin to do is introduce into the schools what people are going to need to get a job. Education that they can use. Not education that develops their mind. Not education that encourages them to think. Rather, you're teaching them a socialized approach to education which really encourages them to not think, but to take their cues from people who are better educated and better off and more qualified to be leaders than they are. In other words, we don't want young people to become creative thinkers. We want people to do what they're told. For a long time, it worked. In the 21st century, it's not working. And we are paying the price. And the fact of the matter is the entire educational establishment that we have built over the generations is built for a world that really doesn't exist anymore. The school year is based around the agricultural calendar. Kids need to be off in the summertime because that's when the crops are harvested. That's when the folks at home need the labor. The whole academic calendar is driven not by the best interest of the students, but by the needs of community, the needs of society. Try to make changes in the academic schedule. You'll run into roadblocks put up by teachers' representatives, teachers' unions. You'll run into roadblocks by parents who want their kids in school because they need somebody to watch their kids while they work or while they play. But the fact of the matter is they look at school as a babysitter they don't have to pay for. When will we get around to focusing our education system on the education of our young people, rather than the needs of society, the wishes of parents, the economic priorities of the economy and business, and all of the other things, all the other priorities that seem to get our attention, rather than the education of our young people? Let me give you one further example of what I think typifies, reflects the severity of the problem. In late May, to be honest, the 27th of May, many of us will remember that President Obama broke new ground when he made arrangements to go to Hiroshima the site of the dropping of the first atomic bomb in 1945. And you'll remember that 3 days later, a second such bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, another Japanese city. You may recall that most of the attention on Obama's visit to Hiroshima focused primarily on whether he should go there. His critics made a big deal out of the fact or the fear that the president would go to Hiroshima and apologize for the use of the bomb. That what Obama was doing was trying to apologize on behalf of the nation for the use of this most deadly weapon. And so most of the criticism, most of the media attention on President Obama's trip to Hiroshima focused on the trip itself, whether he should not even go, whether it's going to be more negative than positive, whether it's going to put the United States in the embarrassing position of seemingly apologizing for what many of these people believed was a positive decision that ended the war and ultimately saved lives. And we know how that debate goes. But the irony is, with few exceptions, most people didn't bother to pay any attention to what Obama said at Hiroshima. The speech that he delivered was pretty much ignored or overlooked. 3 weeks after the event, on the 15th of June, Thomas Friedman, columnist for the New York Times, wrote an article about the president's speech at Hiroshima. You know what prompted Friedman's article? You know what really prompted it? The massacre in Orlando. What Friedman began to recognize is that many of the things that President Obama talked about at Hiroshima were reflected and revealed as more and more information came out about the shooter in Orlando. Thomas Friedman drew attention or brought attention to what the president was saying 3 weeks after he said it. It seems to me the very fact that so few people had any idea what Obama said there is significant. To me, it speaks to the problem we're talking about. It's, in some ways, yet another example of forwarding links on Facebook to your friends that you never really clicked on yourself. It sends the message that you are well read, but it doesn't require that you read anything. all it requires that you be able to talk a good game and create the impression that you read things you never read. You end up to be not educated, but a sophisticated name dropper. Oh, the Federalist Papers. Hell, I read the Federalist Papers when I was in the 9th grade. I think we know here at the Virtual Center that darn few of us read the Federalist Papers. I've been working on them for 50 years, and I'm just reading them now, if that makes sense. Once you begin to appreciate what's in them, you begin to realize that we never really read them. Oh, we read some words. We looked at summaries. Federalist number 10, oh, that's about factions. War and Peace, that's about Russia. And you create the impression that you read War and Peace or Federalist 10. But in fact, did you? And in fact, what loss is society experiencing from the fact that so many people claim to have read it and so few have? That's what Friedman talks about in reference to Obama's speech. One of the things, let me share one line from President Obama's speech. Every great religion promises a pathway to love and peace and righteousness. Yet no religion has been spared from believers who have claimed their faith as a license to kill, unquote. Think about that sentence. Every great religion promises a pathway to love and peace and righteousness. But no religion has been spared from believers who have claimed their faith as a license to kill people who don't agree with them. My God! Think about what that says. Think about how few people even know he said it. Even more frightening, think about the political campaign that we're in now. Look at the candidates and speculate as to whether you're ever again going to hear anything like that sentence from a president. If we were really the educated public that we claim to be, that we pretend to be, presidents would be saying those kinds of things in all of their speeches because they would know that that's what the American people expect and demand. But we expect nothing. We demand nothing. And lo and behold, we've got nothing running for president of the United States in the year 2016. And I'm being overly dramatic there, I realize. But that's the point I'm trying to make. Let me share with you a couple of paragraphs from President Obama's speech at Hiroshima delivered on the 27th of May of this year. In talking about those who died in the bombing, the president makes reference to the fact that their souls continue to speak to us. They ask us to look inward, to take stock of who we are and what we might become. Think of that statement. What is the president saying to us? On what level is he saying it? How many of our citizens have an education which would give them the opportunity to appreciate what the president is saying when he talks about dead souls speaking to us. Dead souls asking us to look inward in order that we can take stock of who we are and what we might become as a world, as people, as interconnected people in a rapidly changing, overwhelming, complex, threatening world. The president goes on. It is not the fact of war that sets Hiroshima apart. Artifacts tell us that violent conflict appeared with the very first man. We're not talking about war, President Obama says. The artifacts tell us that violent conflicts appeared with the very first man. Our early ancestors, having learned to make blades from flint and spears from wood, used these tools not just for hunting, but against their own kind. On every continent, the history of civilization is filled with war, whether driven by scarcity of grain or hunger for gold, compelled by nationalist fervor or by religious zeal. Empires have risen and fallen. Peoples have been subjugated and liberated. And at every juncture, innocents have suffered a countless toll, their names forgotten by time. The World War that reached its brutal end in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was fought among the wealthiest and most powerful of nations. Their civilizations had given the world great cities, magnificent art. Their thinkers had advanced ideas of justice and harmony and truth. And yet the war grew out of the same base instinct for domination or conquest that had caused conflicts among the simplest tribes, an old pattern amplified by new capabilities without new constraints. In the span of a few years, 60 million people would die. Men, women, children, no different than us, shot, beaten, marched, bombed, jailed, starved, gassed to death. There are many sites around the world that chronicle this war, memorials that tell stories of courage and heroism, graves and empty camps that echo of unspeakable depravity. Yet in the image of the mushroom cloud that rose into these skies, we are most starkly reminded of humanity's core contradiction. How the very spark that marks us as a species, our thoughts, our imagination, our language, our tool making, our ability to set ourselves apart from nature and bend nature to our will, those very things also gave us the capacity for unmatched destruction. How often does material advancement or social innovation blind us to this truth? How easily we learn to justify violence in the name of some higher cause. Every great religion promises a pathway, and this is the sentence we open with, promises a pathway to love and peace and righteousness. And yet no religion has been spared from believers who have claimed their faith as a license to kill. Nations arise telling a story that binds people together in sacrifice and cooperation, allowing for remarkable feats. But those same stories have so often been used to oppress and dehumanize those people who are different. Orlando. The very stories that make up America's story, that link us together as a people, give us the makings of a justification to dehumanize, oppress, exclude those who are different from us. Whether they look differently, whether they're different colors, whether they speak with a different accent, whether they don't speak the same language as we do, whether their hair color is different, or whether they don't sleep and love the same way we do. Now to the issue of science. Science allows us to communicate across the seas and fly above the clouds, to cure disease and understand the cosmos. But those same discoveries can be turned into ever more efficient killing machines. The wars of the modern age teach us this truth. Hiroshima teaches us this truth. Technological progress without an equivalent progress in human institutions can doom us. The scientific revolution that led to the splitting of the atom requires a moral revolution as well. If we don't morally develop the capability of controlling our own technology, that technology will control us. That's not President Obama's statement. That's mine. I believe that this is one of the most profound, important speeches that the president ever gave. And he's given several of those. I think more than anything else, what worries me as I look towards the fall elections is that I think we're going to look back and recognize and realize that we had a tremendous advantage for 8 years and we didn't take advantage of it. I really believe that we're on the cusp of looking back on the Obama administration in ways somewhat like we look back on the Carter administration of the late 1970s. There aren't that many people in the world who would disagree that President Carter's effectiveness as President of the United States was, in the eyes of many, questionable. But that President Carter's contribution to humanity since leaving the presidency in 1980 is unmatched. Most people, I think, would agree that we had one hell of a person in the White House for 4 years. And for reasons that we won't or can't go into, we didn't take advantage of it. I am beginning to think that we will look back on the Obama years the same way. What makes me say that? Speeches like this. Speeches that touch things, that touch souls in ways that all of us need, but unfortunately too few of us can appreciate. And part of the reason, maybe most of the reason, why so many of us can't appreciate it is because of the education that we received. An education which directs our attention away from exactly this kind of stuff. Oh, the best education, the Harvards and the Princetons and the Yales and the Stanfords and the Universities of Chicago, they get it. But the masses of people who are out here looking for jobs, they're much more interested in the right to carry, in my freedom to do what I want, when I want, however I want. And they've been led to believe that the Constitution of the United States all comes down to the rights laid out in the First Amendment, and more particularly to the rights that Jefferson laid out in the Declaration of Independence. Inalienable rights. Rights that nobody can touch. Rights that come from God. Rights that I possess because I'm a human being and I'm alive. And increasingly, we have taken it upon ourselves to sell the message that those unalienable rights can grow and grow and grow. There can be an unalienable right to own property. There can be an unalienable right to do whatever you want with your own property. There can be the right to do whatever you want to the environment. There can be a right to treat other people, other human beings, in ways that you can justify, because you can point to a book that tells you that you have the right to do this. Or you can point to a line in a book which tells you that the way these people live is not godly. Therefore, as a trooper, as a soldier of God, you have the right to stop them from doing what they do. My God, think of this. It's incredible. Back to reality. This is why I believe that devoting some of our programs to education regularly is important. I believe that there are too few places where education as education is considered, seriously considered. I think we've become more of a credentialed society. We're much more conscious of the certificates and the diplomas and the degrees and the credentials that people have, rather than what they mean, or the depth or level of education that they symbolize. To be very honest with you, I don't see an awful lot of difference except in the level between those people who are on Facebook and forward substantive articles and links to other people that they don't read themselves. One study says 70% of the readers of Facebook do that. A follow-up study suggests, done by the Columbia University and the National University in France, suggests that it's 59%. The numbers don't matter, but it's well over half of the people who are regular users of Facebook don't read what's on there. When I started this Facebook page for the Virtual Center, the message I was getting from people is don't put stuff on there that's too long. If people see a lot of words, they won't read it. If people think it's going to take them too long to read it, they won't read it. So make it quick. That's why Twitter is so important and so symbolic and so popular. Because it's limited to, 146 characters or something? All it gives you time for is to say it and get it out there. And that's what we want as a society, or that's what we think we want, because we really aren't aware of any alternatives. I'm suggesting that education is full of alternatives. Not only that, but I think education is so attractive and so infectious that it's going to make the alternatives damn appealing. And yes, I do agree with Thomas Jefferson. I believe education is the key to this republic. I believe as the challenges to this republic have changed, then the way we approach education has to change with it. So far it hasn't. That, I believe, is the problem. I think what we've looked at thus far is an indication of how we haven't yet defined the problem in such a way that we can begin to solve it. So I really believe that what we're doing here yesterday, today, and obviously tomorrow, and probably further into next week than that, what we're looking at here is beginning to get our arms around the problem in such a way that we can begin to understand it and to define it. And once we define it, it seems to me, we can begin to address it. And when we really begin to address it, I think we have a chance to solve it. But even more important than that, I really believe that solving it is the key to our salvation as a people. Not just as a nation, as a race. As we rapidly move toward destroying the environment we live on, the planet we live on. I think if we don't begin to educate the masses of our people in order that they can appreciate what we're doing to the world that has been given to us, then we will indeed destroy it. I really believe that's the message that President Obama delivered at Hiroshima. Maybe the people of Japan got it, but I'm pretty certain that the people of this nation did not. And part of the reason is so few even know what President Obama said at Hiroshima. I think that's really the background or the message that makes this topic so worthy of our attention here at the Virtual Center. I really believe that there are paragraphs, there are phrases, there are ideas, thoughts, suggestions in this speech which makes it very, very important. I believe with the president that the mere fact that you can do something doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it. There's absolutely no question, for example, going back to Hiroshima, using that as an example. I can't measure the percentage. I don't know exactly what the what the accurate measurement is, but there's absolutely no question that there is enough information to support the idea that partly the decision, in part, I don't know what part, but in part, the decision to use that weapon twice involved things other than ending the war in order to save lives. There's no question that many people that were involved in the ultimate decision to use that weapon saw the rise of the Soviet Union as a threat down the road that could be stopped in its tracks. Not only when we demonstrated that we had a weapon like this, but more important, that we would use it. I also think that there's evidence that the mere fact that we had it, in part, justified using it. What good is to spend the money and the time and invest the talent in developing the weapon if we don't use it? We've got it. It can end the war. It can solve our problems with the potential threat of communism. Let's do it. Where is the moral check? Where is the sense where we say, hey, wait a minute, let's think this through a little bit?
Hey, Dr. Bill?
Yes, Bob.
Can I inject another aspect into that, please?
Oh, please do.
I don't think you can undertake this analysis without also taking racism into account.
Oh yeah, you are absolutely right.
And there's context for it as well, because among other things, the war as brutal as the war in Europe was, it was only fought on the ground from June 1944 to May 1945 as far as Allied troops were concerned.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the war in the South Pacific was fought almost from jump by not only naval and air, but by ground forces.
Right.
And along the way, it is documented that American troops, we know what we've history has gone to great lengths to explain the atrocities of the Japanese. What it has not done as good a job of is explaining the atrocities of the Allied troops,
mm-hmm.
who collected ears, who collected skulls, mm-hmm. who dismembered corpses, and to the point that it became a problem for the American military.
Right.
There were tremendous confiscations of body parts as the troops began returning homeward, or cycled homeward. And when you take into account the civilian death toll, and there were horrible civilian death tolls in places like Dresden as well,
mm-hmm.
and on the Allied side in Winchester, Canterbury,
mm-hmm.
Places that that there was no good reason to destroy. But it's hard for me to comprehend
mm-hmm.
the use of the atomic weapons without taking into account the fact that we had waged a propaganda campaign based to shocking extents on race.
Right.
And I
but
don't
the
think
the question.
I don't think that call would have been as easy to make had it been a matter of dropping the devices on
in Europe,
nice white German people.
Right. That's a question I was going to say that often is posed. If the decision had been to drop it on Berlin, would we have done it? And many people resent that question because the race issue jumps right out at you as being the variable there. And And a lot of people resent the question for that reason. But it's an important one. There's a lot of evidence that if this had been a Caucasian enemy, we probably wouldn't have made the decision to use the bomb.
And beyond that, there's also the underreported history that the Japanese began suing for peace as early as May 1945 with the fall of Germany. And they offered only one condition, that they be allowed to retain the emperor.
Emperor, yes.
And we said no, that the surrender must be unconditional.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they surrendered unconditionally, after we had used the most horrific weapons ever developed by the mind of man on them, we let them keep the emperor.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is they were ready to lay down their arms. So a lot of the ex post facto justifications, it saved 1 million lives because we didn't have to invade the home islands. Well, A, they didn't have much to defend the home islands with.
Mm-hmm.
And B, they were already suing for peace.
Right. Right. Bob, the implication, the idea of race here is incredibly important. There's absolutely no question. I think you're right. But I guess my message is the fact that we can rationalize doing some unbelievable things when you think about it, because we've done
unspeakable.
We've done it, and we continue to do it. And not only that, but we continue to rationalize it because we've become very polished rationalizers. We know how to reason, but we don't know how to plug in issues like right and wrong and morality and all of these other issues into those rational decisions. You know, one of the things I've heard people criticize the humanities for, the way they do it, is to say, hell, Hitler loved dogs. In other words, he was a very, very sensitive person because he loved animals.
Oh, he was also a committed vegetarian.
Okay, right. So I mean, that's the rationale, that those kinds of things don't matter, that they don't play into this. I think what we'll see in Jefferson, to a large degree, is the fact that they play a major role in this. Jefferson's whole thinking is, how the hell can we basically expand, not our intellectual, our rational skills, how can we expand on our sense of morality, on our sense of right and wrong?
Indeed.
How can we basically alert the world and sensitize the world?
Well, I will let you wrap up. I've got a call coming in I've got to take. But thank you, Dr. Bill, for letting me jump in.
Thank you, buddy. All right. I think it's time to wind it up anyway. We're at 58 minutes after the hour. We've got a little bit less than 2 minutes to go. I appreciate Bob's comment because it definitely belonged in there, the issue of race. It becomes part of the rationalization for the decision. But the fact of the matter is, when you consider the outcome of the decision, then it raises serious human ethical questions, moral questions, it seems to me, that many people would rather not confront, because they can come up with all sorts of rational reasons why we did the right thing when we did. And that's why many people didn't want the president to go to Hiroshima at all. I think it's a hell of a speech. And I think the fact that more of us don't appreciate it or even know about it speaks, to the issues we're into. But we'll have to pursue this again tomorrow. We're at 59 minutes after the hour. I want to thank Bob for joining us. I want to thank all of you for listening to this program on this Tuesday, the 21st day of June. This is Bill O'Brien. Have a wonderful evening. Enjoy. And I hope you'll be back with us tomorrow at our regular time. Thank you so very much.